Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Early on in his work on moral virtue, Plutarch is going to begin to set out his point of view on what virtue would be by thinking about, well, where would virtue actually be within the human soul? And this requires that one have a psychology. Now, Plutarch is what we call a Middle Platonist, and he is inheriting from Plato and the other Platonists before him what we call a tripartite conception of the soul, but it's one that's actually, quite sophisticated. He talks also about, what Aristotle brings to the table and other people as well, and he's going to tell us something very interesting about both Plato and a predecessor who we don't actually have any texts from, but lots and lots of stories about, namely Pythagoras. So he's going to say that when people claim that the soul is got just one ruling part to it, so he has in mind here the Stoics and several other schools as well, they're ignoring our twofold nature. And it's interesting because twofold, diplos here, is going to be twofold and then twofold and then twofold as we unfold it. So they recognize a distinction between the body and the soul, but what they miss is that the soul itself has multiplicity within it. Namely, we can distinguish two parts within the soul, a rational part, a logike or logos, right? And then an irrational, alogon, or, alogike, meros, a part of it that isn't itself rational. And ideally, the rational runs the show within the soul. Oftentimes, that's not the case. And so he's going to tell us that there's an element of composition, a twofoldedness, a dissimilarity of the soul to itself, and the irrational, as though it were another substance, another kind of thing, is mingled and joined with the rational as if it was through some sort of compulsion of nature. And he says, Pythagoras actually grasped this. Now, why would he say that? You may be thinking about the Pythagorean theorem. Well, Pythagoras was particularly interested in music. Music and mathematics are closely connected in ancient philosophy. And Pythagoras seemed to have thought that music can be used, when it's understood properly, as a remedy for the irrational parts of our soul. So like he says, the study of music was introduced to enchant and assuage the soul because he perceived that the soul doesn't have every part of itself subjected to discipline and to study, as the rational part should be, and not every part can be changed from vice by reason itself. You don't just think, I shouldn't behave this way, and then you don't behave that way. We have to actually persuade the irrational part of ourselves to cooperate with reason, and, as he says, to mold it, to tame it, and to, lead it in the right direction. And that's what music as a force, according to Plutarch,
Pythagoras is saying, can do. This is, by the way, an idea that Plato also buys into and Aristotle discusses in his own way. Then he moves on to Plato, and he says something really interesting here. He says, Plato comprehended very clearly, firmly, and without reservation, both that the soul of this universe, the cosmos, the totality, is not simple or uncompounded or uniform, but that, so this is the second part, being compounded of potentialities of sameness and otherness. This is a reference, of course, to Plato's Sophist, the dialogue. One part of it is ever governed in uniformity and revolves in but one and the same order, which maintains control. This is the heavens above the moon. This is a common conception that many ancient schools of philosophy had. But the other part is split into movements and circles, which go in opposition to each other, hupenantius, right? And wander about, planetus, giving rise to the beginnings of differentiation and change and dissimilarity. So the universe itself has a totally rational, superlunary realm, but also a messier, irrational, sublunary realm, which includes where we are, right, here on Earth. And then Plato's going to go on and say, the soul of the human being is, you could look at it as being a portion, a meros, a part, or as being a copy, mimema, an imitation, pale imitation, of the entire universe. So the universe itself has this interesting bifurcation, so do we as well. And he does say, we don't have the same emotions or passions as the universe. We're not claiming that sort of thing. And, maybe the proportions are quite a bit different in us. But what this means, according to Plutarch, is that we have an intelligent and rational part, a noeiron, a thinking part, and a logistikon, a reasoning or calculating part, right? That's the good, the best part of ourselves. But we also have a passionate and irrational part, right? And this passionate part, what's being talked about there, pathetikon. We get the word pathetic from this, but pathos in that sense, or patheticness, is only one kind of passion, because passion means emotion. So we're thinking about things like anger and fear and joy and desire and disgust and all these other sorts of emotions, which are to some degree, very often, not rational, irrational. They have a rationale to them. It's not as if they're totally foreign to reason, and they do involve some thinking, but they're not the same thing as the rational part. And he says that, the intelligent, rational part, its duty is to govern and rule the individual. The other part, the passionate, irrational, it's variable, disorderly, and it needs a director. If you don't have a director, well, you'll quickly feel the need for that as your emotions drive you to do things. So we've got this bifurcation within ourselves between rational and irrational. Now, here's where it gets distinctively Platonic. The irrational part itself is further divided, and Plato, he most clearly lays this out in the Republic, but you can also see references to something like this in the Phaedrus. There's a discussion of it in a very late dialogue, the Timaeus, and this became, we could say Platonic orthodoxy. There are the appetites, the appetitive part, epithumai, or epithumetikon, right? And then what we translate as the spirited part. Sometimes it gets translated as passionate part, but we don't want to do that here. The thumoeides, which thumatike or thumos is what Plato actually uses for this. This is the part of us that gets angry. Also the part that cares about respect or honor and competing with other people. And Plato sees these as distinct from each other. The appetites are for things like eating, drinking, making money, having sex, avoiding things that would take pleasures away from us or inflict pains. It's very much connected with the body. The thumos is a better part of ourself that mediates between the rational part and the irrational appetites. And ideally, it's being an ally to the reasoning and intelligent part, right? So that's Plato's sort of scheme, and there's a proper ordering between these parts of the soul. The rational part should be running the show. Thumos should be allowing us to respond to dangers, threats, deal rightly, exhibit courage with the situations that we find ourselves in. The appetites, we should indulge them to a certain extent, but don't leave it up to them to decide what they're going to do. Let the rational part decide that, and the thumotic part impose that. So then he talks about Aristotle. And interestingly, Plutarch, who had access to Aristotelian texts that we ourselves don't have at this time, said that, at the start, Aristotle was basically following in Plato's footsteps, but then he diverged. He formed his own theory about this, where he assigns the spirited part, thumos or the thumoeides, to the appetitive part. Now, the evidence that he gives for this is faithful to Aristotle's own treatments, for what we have of Aristotle, but doesn't actually seem to make the case. I'll tell you why in just a moment. So he says that anger, thumos, so there's different words for anger that Aristotle uses. Thumos is one of them. Orge is the more proper term, but the faculty of thumos, he says, is a desire to cause pain in return, orexis antelupeiseos, right? So antelupeiseos, to give pain in response to somebody else. You hurt me, I want to hurt you in some way. This is not Aristotle's biggest definition of anger, which he provides in the Rhetoric, but it does come up at different places in Aristotle's works, for example, in the Topics, where it is a definition of anger that's provided, and it seems to have been a very common one in ancient times. Now, what's the problem here? So Plutarch rightly says that Aristotle calls thumos a kind of desire, an orexis. Aristotle uses this word orexis as the broadest category of desire, affectivity, emotion, and it both includes thumos and also epithumia, or the epithumetike part, the appetitive kinds of desires, and what he also calls rational desire, boulesis. So it's not technically correct to say that Aristotle rolls the spirited part of the soul into the appetitive part of the soul, but it is correct to say that he makes them all a kind of affectivity overall. As a matter of fact, these are just things that happen in the irrational part of the soul for Aristotle. But Aristotle has something in common with Plato and with Pythagoras and with Plutarch, where Plutarch thinks he's on the right track, which is to say that we do have a rational part of the soul, and that should be running the show, and that the irrational part of the soul that can feel emotion, so not every other part of the irrational soul, like the perceptive part or the nutritive or vegetative part, he says these are completely deaf to reason and just offshoots of our flesh attached to our body. The spirited part is lacking reason. And interestingly here, he uses a Greek term for something that lacks something that it should have, right? It's deprived of reason, and it doesn't have, here it says it's lacking any reason of its own, but really it doesn't have a share in. The word there is ameros, right? So it doesn't have a share in reason, but it is by nature fitted. And he uses the word for to arise by nature so as to have certain, we could say, possibilities for itself in relation to the rational or reasoning part and the thinking part, the practically wise part. So it has the capacity to listen to it, to hear what it has to say and to follow that, to turn itself towards it, right? To pay attention to what reason has to say, to yield to it. So reason says you should do this, don't do that, don't take revenge on that person right now, and it listens to that, and to conform itself. And here Plutarch uses this really interesting long Greek verb, kata schematizestai, right? So we get the word schema from that. And a schema is sort of like a structure or a blueprint or a template or something like that. So it has the capacity to follow the template in itself that the rational part is giving. And so, if it's in good condition, if it hasn't been corrupted by foolish pleasure, as he's going to say, or, pleasure going beyond what it should, or a life of no restraint, well, then it can actually do that. So these two parts of the soul, irrational and rational, turn out to be something that we can't get rid of and say, it's all just one ruling part or something along those lines. We need that distinction in here, and we can even go further with that distinction into talking about the spirited and the appetitive part, as Plutarch is going to do later in the work.